day-to-day frustration, right? So I'm in the middle of doing a task, and you, as my manager, the owner, come in and said, don't do it that way, do it the other way. Both ways would be acceptable. But if you don't give me the right to follow the path to achieve the result that I am choosing, then you, on one level, disrespect me. And on the other, you're not giving me the opportunity to learn. Some people call it micromanaging, but you're not giving me the opportunity to learn from my paths and from my choices. Now, a corollary to that is you have to give me the right to be wrong. And if I am wrong, we have to have an adult discussion about it. In the military, they call it an after action discussion. Rather than criticize, you can analyze. And the way you would analyze is, what do we learn from this? Okay. What can we do better? How can we approach it better? But if
Hi, I'm Christy. I'm your host for Inside the C-Suite, where execs get real about leadership, impact, and what truly drives high-stake decisions. I'm honored to have on the show today Mark Shank. He's the founder of Shank ADR. He specializes in alternative dispute resolution with a focus on labor and employment law. Mark is ranked one of America's best lawyers alongside a dozen other awards. He's also been ranked one of Texas' top lawyers for the past 25 years. The buck doesn't stop there. He also taught employment law at SMU. Mark is a dear friend, mentor, and trusted advisor. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Christy. I'm very pleased to be here.
Where are you joining us from today?
Spicewood, Texas, on Lake Travis.
And I hear you're going to go barefooting today.
As soon as we finish, I'm going to grab my boat and we're going to head out and go barefoot skiing.
And for the audience, if you don't know what this is, because I didn't until I met you a few years ago and had the privilege of learning with you, it is where you get behind a boat or beside a boat on your bare feet. And about how fast do you guys go, Mark?
I ski anywhere between 40 and 45. Somebody you know very well skis faster than that in racing.
So if you guys don't know about this sport, check it out. And Mark, you actually hold a position within the barefoot community. Can you share about that?
I am the chairman of the World Barefoot Water Skiing Rules Committee. So, I'm a lawyer. I get to make up the rules. It's great.
And we are so grateful to have you there. So, Mark, you've had a very successful career, over 40 years experience. Thank you in advance for holding space for the audience, because a lot of our audience are emerging leaders, executive leaders, founders, and you bring such soulful insight to things that they should be thinking about and that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So I gave you a very brief overview, but was there anything I missed in your background that you'd like to share before we kick off?
Yes, I've pivoted the last 5, 6 years to where I'm not doing what I did for the first 40 years, which was represent corporate America, including executives, in all things involving the workplace. So most of the observations I'm giving you is from that period in my life.
Thank you. Very much appreciated. And we can change the names to protect the innocent and not so innocent if needed. So, Mark, I have a lot of burning questions for you. What are the top 3 common themes that you see that pose a risk to an organization's success?
I would say noncompliance or ignorance of the law, responsibility without authority, and silos.
Ooh, is there one that takes number 1? Or are they all kind of equal?
They're pretty equal. The one that I see most common, particularly in what I'll call emerging or growing organizations, is responsibility without authority.
I've experienced that in my life as well.
Almost everybody has. Yeah.
Can you share with us what your point of view is on what that definition is of responsibility without authority?
It's when someone is given responsibility over a project, a task, an organizational structure, and isn't given the authority to make real-time decisions in order to use the path that they think best to get a good result. As you well know, 3 different people can achieve a very acceptable result in the workplace using very different paths.
Yes. And you did encourage me to get my Clifton Strength certification, and I am happy to say that I did. So those of you might pick up that Mark and I have a very, very close relationship. He is someone that I have self-appointed my mentor and has been a great advisor to myself and many of our close friends. So, Mark, when we talk about responsibility without authority, what are some risks and organizational impacts that you've seen?
Well, just day-to-day frustration, right? So I'm in the middle of doing a task, and you, as my manager, the owner, come in and said, don't do it that way, do it the other way. Both ways would be acceptable. But if you don't give me the right to follow the path to achieve the result that I am choosing, then you, on one level, disrespect me. And on the other, you're not giving me the opportunity to learn. Some people call it micromanaging, but you're not giving me the opportunity to learn from my paths and from my choices. Now, a corollary to that is you have to give me the right to be wrong. And if I am wrong, we have to have an adult discussion about it. In the military, they call it an after action discussion. Rather than criticize, you can analyze. And the way you would analyze is what do we learn from this? Okay. What can we do
Hmm.
better? How can we approach it better? But if I've never given the authority to choose my own path and to be wrong, because a lot of times you learn from being wrong, then I'll never reach my full potential.
That's interesting. When you say that, it makes me think of trust, the importance of having a trusted environment. Because if you're in a position where you've got responsibility without authority, you probably don't have any influence, right? So, how does trust play into this factor?
Well, it plays in directly. If you don't trust me as your employee to make decisions, then I'm going to be frustrated. I'm more likely to experience burnout. I'm going to be less efficient because I'm going to be saying, whoa, if I make this call without talking to my boss, will I get criticized? My morale will be low. And of course, there'll be accountability gaps because if there's not a fluidity in our relationship, I won't know who's accountable for what at certain times. And I would wrap that up in a inefficiency bow. I would say that all these things result in inefficiency, starts and stops, and like I said before, take away from the fluidity of me trying to accomplish my appointed tasks.
That's really interesting. So, what advice would you give somebody? Obviously, you've got to build trust. So, there's a couple of things I think that are happening. How can an organization or a leader instill trust and maybe break this chain? Because it sounds like, obviously the inefficiency bow is one of the biggest deterrents of following this methodology. But what can leaders do to kind of help navigate?
Well, the first thing the leader has to do is understand that the organization will be better served in the long term if they pull back and they align authority with responsibility. If it's my job to hire people in my department, then you should give me the authority to hire the people in my department. Maybe there's a discussion before the decisions are made to make certain that we're aligned philosophically. Compensation, of course, making sure that the person has the skills that we need. But we talk about those on the front end, and then after we have those discussions, when we are aligned with regard to our goals, then authority is delegated to me to make the decisions. So maybe if I give you bullet points, it would be avoid overly centralized decision making. Number one. And number two,
Yep.
make sure we have clarity in both roles and authority and be willing to delegate power. To a lot of people, control of details is a form of power. And there are certain people, particularly strong willed people who are the type that start a company, they have a fear of delegation. Now, as an aside, I was one of those people. I literally hired a business coach to teach me how to delegate. And as a part and parcel of that delegation, I took two different personality tests to understand how my work style affects other people and their work styles. And for me, it was eye opening. I now realize why certain personality types reacted badly to my style. I tend to think of things in broad brush and overarching terms. And I realized that the personality types that are really detail oriented, their personality is such they can't process at someone who's an overarching thinker because I'm leaving too many details out and it's just uncomfortable for them. That was fairly eye opening to me.
I've experienced the same thing, and those assessments are so helpful in and outside of an organization as well in your personal life. Like I realized, I recently took one, and I'm an individualist, which means that I have the ability to see the intricacies of a person and what makes them unique, which also gives me the superpower of being a really excellent gift giver. So it gets frustrating when I don't get that returned. And I see that as maybe a lack of awareness of me when actually it's just that person's made up a little bit differently. So learning how to put those tools in your tool belt to help you be more efficient is perfect.
Let me add one more thing.
Yeah.
It also made me a better husband.
Yes. Yes, it is it's making me a better partner as well. So we talked a little bit about what organizations can do to make it more clear and maybe reduce that risk of putting someone in this uncomfortable position of responsibility without authority. If you're an individual working for an organization and you find yourself in this position, and most of us have, what advice do you have to the human that's working in an organization that finds themselves in responsibility without authority? How can they overcome that and how can they influence change?
Boy, you have to do it incrementally because you're almost certainly dealing with a strong willed person. And so if you just sit down and tell the strong willed person they're doing it wrong, that won't work out to you. But you can sort of set the table with non threatening, non challenging phrases. For example, let's you and I sit down and let me know what your priorities are. And then let me handle it and let's see how that works out.
Okay.
That
That's a
that
whole approach.
phraseology is much better than more blunt. "How come you're not letting me handle my own stuff?" You know, I was just trying to think up a bad way to say it, and that's an example of what I call giving somebody the message incrementally. Another way to do it is I had a manager of me, and when I would come in, upset about something, he would tell me a story. Well, I'll give you a quick example. I thought I was working too hard, and I said, "I've been working 6 days a week," and he says, "Yeah, I understand. I've been working 80 hours a week." And I realized what this indirect person was telling me was that I do understand your situation and I'm empathetic to it, but I'm in the same boat as you. So that's an example of how you could tell somebody something indirectly and incrementally.
Nice. And if they don't see momentum, obviously there's a time and a place to leave. So is there any guidance you have for somebody to help identify that they're in a no-win situation? It might be a good point for them to start looking in a different direction.
Well, if they come home frustrated and kick the dog and yell at the wife, that'd be a good that'd be a couple of good indicators. But I think it's one of those things. I think you'll know it if you're if you're put in the position of responsibility without authority, you'll notice the frustration, the morale, the sort of knot in your stomach when you get in the car and drive to work. Looking back on it, I've experienced those feelings, and I think life's too short for to have those for very long, assuming you have other options.
Well, and they manifest in you, right? So you get into like a toxicity at work, and it can manifest into your body and make you ill and have stress and all the different things that we put ourselves through. And so I know that we're talking through this, and we're kind of when you think about this, you think about. I don't know that organizations intentionally put people in this situation. You stated founders, in my opinion, are usually the most passionate, crazy types, right? And then they go collect this band of weirdos. So whenever they're starting a company or they're in an organization, what are you seeing as far as like is silos? Is that playing a role? Because that was one of your top three. How does that play a role?
It's it's kind of similar, but on the other hand, almost the opposite. So we're obviously an organization has to be big enough to have enough people where you'll have a siloed department. Example, you might have sales versus fulfillment versus support, where whoever's managing, let's say, support starts creating an atmosphere. Well, we're better, we work harder. So that's the one thing. And then the people in the organization start that attitude is fostered, and therefore it manifests itself in ways that are probably not helpful to the organization. And then you have the situation where you have favoritism, and we could spend a lot of time with talking about favoritism. And a lot of people equate favoritism with discrimination. So that now ties back to my number one concern, the first thing I mentioned, which is ignorance or noncompliance with the law. And then the final thing I've seen is what I call hoarding of information,
Ooh.
the opposite of working collaboratively.
What do you think drives the hoarding of information?
Power. Look, everybody, it is a part of the human condition to crave power or uh, crave authority or power or a feeling that they are in control of certain things at certain levels. It's part of the human condition. Some people are more susceptible to it than others.
From a leadership perspective, how do you handle that these things are happening? So if you're a leader and you're in an organization, you're experiencing some toxicity and some power struggles, what are some of the ahas to look out for that you're in this situation? I mean, I think you're going to feel it in your body, but are you seeing any other indications? Well, I know turnover, like for example, could be an indication.
If we're talking about silos, it'll if you're the manager, you'll hear about it because it's part of Mark's greater goody theory. When no matter how well treated certain employees are, if they perceive somebody else is getting perks, goodies, time off, bonuses, gifts, candy, affirmation, raises, bonuses, uh, if they perceive that somebody else is getting more goodies, you'll hear about it. May I share a story?
Please.
Okay. It was a long time ago, but early in my career, I was the de facto manager of a law firm that had a lot of people in it older than I, but that's just how it worked out. A dear woman who I to this day greatly admire, who had a master's degree, and she worked as a receptionist, but also she proofread our work product because she had a master's in English. And one day she comes into my office in tears. I can see the veins protruding from her neck. She was
Mm.
angry, and it was all about that she perceived another employee got more time off or more breaks than she. And I probably didn't handle it as well as I could. But what I said was, well, aren't we treating you exactly as we promised? Are you getting the breaks and time off that we've promised you? Yes, but this other person's getting more. I said, I apologize for that. That person works for the most senior partner in the firm, and I'm not going to be able to affect that. But I will say something to him. But I promise you, this senior partner's had this person working for him for 30 years. So he had a little bit of founder syndrome, right? He was effectively one of the founders of the firm and felt like it was his prerogative to deviate from firm policy and give his trusted employee more perks than the others. And so that I think that's a pretty good example of why favoritism tends to be so toxic.
That's a really good example as to why favoritism is so toxic. And favoritism drives bad behaviors. It drives humans to not show up as themselves because they're feeling like they're being treated differently, which I'm sure causes challenges with complaints and potential litigation.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word trust before. Let's circle back to that because favoritism is going to erode trust. It not trust in me as your manager, but more trust in the organization. The unfavored employee says he or she is following all the policies, doing everything right, getting great reviews, yet the favorite employee gets more perks. And that is bad for the organization. And to circle back to your question, you'll hear about it as a manager, I promise you.
Or you'll hear about it at the water cooler. It
Yes,
spreads like cancer. Yeah. So what's dangerous about water cooler conversation, Mark?
it's the same as texting used to be, is now. For some reason, people will make unguarded comments in texts and at the water cooler that they would not make other places. And what happens is from a lawyer's point of view, it doesn't matter the context of the conversation. Unguarded comments often end up g- taking center stage in any kind of employment lawsuit. And for some reason, once I would just scratch my head. I would have these conversations with executives and their employees, and I'd say, "Don't put anything in email that you don't want on the front page of the New York Times." And they would follow that, and then they'd say things in text that just would make you shake your head. To me, I equate texts and water cooler conversations the same. And what makes them dangerous is they're unguarded and can be taken out of.
Context is so important. Do you have the same point of view when it comes to, social media today? TikTok, LinkedIn, like all the different channels that we have to push information out and comments out. Do you ever see that Posing a challenge.
Sure. Same thing. I mean, I know you threw me a softball because you and I both know people who have very important jobs. A couple who are in the news right now and might have been working for academic institutions that have made unguarded comments in social media, and it's cost them their jobs. We've seen it in sports, we've seen it in industry, we've seen it in entertainment, we've seen it in the tech space. People who ought to know better, people who are really smart, who are very high powered jobs, for some reason, their brain just goes south on them when they get on social media.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that as well. Obviously, we've got one of the best attorneys, lawyers in the United States on the show today, and we're talking about things that honestly that feel very simple. They feel like they shouldn't be complicated, but yet they are, and they cause such significant issues and challenges for organizations, and they impact the humans in such a negative way when they're not executed appropriately. So we've talked about silos, we talked about responsibility without authority, and we've danced around about the law. And I'm curious what guidance you would have, Mark, because there is an understanding or an ignorance around just basic employment law. And look, we all do our job and show up every day, and not everybody is a lawyer. But what do you see? What guidance do you have for organizations that maybe are starting out and want to safeguard themselves against this toxicity and potential litigation in the future?
Yeah, I always talk about the prism with which the employee filters what they hear.
Tell me more about that.
Well, a lot of my practice was employment discrimination. And someone would make, let's make an age related comment to an employee. Hey, when you going to retire? Or how many grandkids you got? And that person suddenly starts, it sort of flips a switch where their prism changes. And suddenly they view adverse actions in the employment place, a criticism or a failure to get a promotion, you name it, anything that they view as adverse. Suddenly they start, well, maybe that's because they think I'm too old. And so, um, and of course, having taken literally hundreds of depositions, most people know what a deposition is. It's testimony related to a case. I really came to the conclusion about the prism because I would almost always, when someone was brought a discrimination case, there was something that happened to them that changed how they viewed their treatment in the workplace. So back to my unguarded comments statement, you could, with an unguarded comment, sort of shift that prism unknowingly.
And if you find yourself in a situation, because we all don't show up 100% every day and we say things we don't mean to, but if you find yourself in a situation where you might have said something that could potentially put somebody seeing a prism a different way, what guidance do you have, or what have you seen strategically wise that would help correct that? Is there anything that leaders can
Yeah,
do?
be humble, apologize. Do so in a way that is allows the person you're talking to keep their dignity. But humility is not a bad thing in the workplace, particularly for a leader. And I can talk about that a little more if you'd like me to.
I would love this. This is all really good guidance. I'd love to
Okay.
wrap it in a bow. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so long story short, I went into a meeting thinking I was going to start winding my practice down, and I was thinking about getting a master's and spend more time in that area because I was already teaching. And I came out of the meeting as the managing partner. So that sort of changed the direction of the next 5 years of my life. And so I started thinking about, okay, well, how do we improve things around here? And I read a book, I can't tell you the name of it, but it was impactful to me because it said a lot of times people on the lowest levels of the organization know more about the workplace, how it's functioning, how to be improved. And that was a eureka moment for me. So over the course of the next 2 or 3 months, I started asking people to come talk to me. Now, the first thing I had to say is, "You're not in trouble." I I had to say, "You're
I
not in
could see
trouble."
that.
Yeah, right, because most people, most people who know anything about a law firm could visualize the copy room, and the fellow who was the head of the copy room, really important function in a law firm, but viewed as a very low level function. I asked him to come see me. He said, "Really? You want to talk to me?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, you see stuff all the time. I bet you have ideas of how to improve things." He said, "Yes,
Yeah.
I do, but I didn't think anybody would ever care about what I thought." I got 3 or 4 nuggets out of it. And by the way, Loyalty.
Yeah. Well, and that's such a great example because I do find that what I've seen in my 20-year career in talent is the higher you go, people there's almost like this ego or this facade that you only want to be in this group or talk to this group. And there seems to be a lack of appreciation for the lower level employees, and they bring such great knowledge. I think together, if we collaborate and are open and we can establish an organization of trust, those are the organizations that are going to thrive. Those are the people that you're going to see get promoted hand over fist.
May I give you one more example?
I love these nuggets. Yeah.
Okay. So, uh, one of my mentors, who was the CEO of a very large construction company in Dallas, if he sees this, he'll know who he is. And he was the CEO for over 10 years. And I would have breakfast with him once a quarter. And I realized why his employees liked him so much. Whenever the wait server came over, he would say, "Hi, what's your name?" And my name's Dion. Well, how long have you been here, Dion? In other words, instantly he took not a fake interest, but a real interest in that server's as a human being. And what I noticed, he had a really good memory. I noticed when we went back to the same place, he would say hi to Dion, even if Dion was not waiting on him. And I thought to myself, yeah, this guy understands how to manage a workplace with, as you might guess, a construction organization is going to have lots of levels of hierarchy. And I said, I just knew that that's how he handled himself at the workplace. And I can bet you he went on the production floor and talked to the new uh, gopher, whatever that job was, whatever the lower, I bet he went out and greeted them and told them he was glad they were here. And I just watching him, we never talked about it, but just watching him, I learned a lot.
Well, and I've known you for 4 years or so, and just hearing your stories over that time and how you navigate and the people you help, the type of situations that you've been involved in, there's not a doubt in my body that you've learned all of this from experiencing it, seeing what's good, seeing what's bad, and you're brilliant at reading people. You're brilliant at kind of ushering in peace, right, between two parties. So thank you so much for sharing the top 3 lookouts from Mark. Guys, you can thank me later. You got free counsel, but it's know your law, correct your responsibility without authority, get some KPIs in there, make sure everybody understands what they're actually doing. And then silos, let's break those down and no more silos. Mark, you've given us some amazing time and advice. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave the audience with that we didn't cover?
Yeah, I guess the thought that everybody has a bad day
Oh,
and give everybody the grace to have a bad day. Step away. We all have things going on in our lives that might drive the way we're reacting to a certain situation. If you see somebody's having a bad day, step away and deal with it later, if possible.
that's really good advice. Well, Mark, if somebody finds themselves in a pickle and they need your service, where would they go find you?
Yeah, my website is called Shank, SHANKADR, and so that's my website. I'm pretty much limiting myself these days to what's service as a neutral mediator arbitrator. But if someone needs counsel, I have some people that I know that I'd be happy to refer you to. They're people I've personally worked with and trained, and in fact, these are people that I send my old clients to. So if somebody has that need, that's how I would take care of it.
I love it. An invaluable resource you are for everyone. And what a great story it is that you've got your career to a point where you get to choose who you work with and when you work with them. So that's where everybody hopes to get to. Mark, thank you so much for holding space for myself and your friendship and our audience and from our community's heart as well. Thank you for everything you do to usher in peace amongst people that just aren't seeing eye to eye. So
My pleasure.
awesome. Well, guys, we'll see you next time.